So with that said, I'd like to now invite to the stage this powerhouse panel featuring Judith LeBlanc, Executive Director of the Native Organizers Alliance. Yeah, give them huge rounds of applause. Jade Begay, Indigenous Rights and Climate Policy Expert, organizer and filmmaker. You have lots of titles here. Abigail Echo Hawk, Chief Research Officer for the Seattle Indian Health Board. Mary Kim Titla from Unity. And we have Twyla Baker, who is from the Hidatsa College in Newtown. Sorry, Twyla, you're going to kill me. I just ruined that. And Kim Teehee, who's with the Cherokee Nation and also the designee delegate to Congress for the Cherokee Nation. So everybody give a big round of applause and let's get our conversation started. So as we get our conversation started, you know, as I told the ladies, I would rather them introduce themselves, because clearly, especially as I stumble over and butcher things. So I actually want to start with our virtual matriarchs over here. And Twyla, I would love for you to kick us off by just introducing yourself.
Sure. Oh, I'm so happy to be here with all of you. Just the amount of power sitting on that stage. I wish I could be there with you in person. My name is Dr. Twyla Baker, and I am the president of Nueta, Hidatsa, Sahnish College. We changed our name from Fort Berthold Community College in 2015 back to our traditional name. So very, very glad to be here.
Thank you, Twyla. And Kim?
OCO, I'm Kimberly Teehee, Cherokee Nation's delegate to Congress. I also serve as Senior Vice President for Cherokee Nation Businesses, where I oversee government relations for both Cherokee Nation and the businesses. I spent nearly 20 years in Washington, D.C., having worked in the U.S. House of Representatives as the first ever senior policy advisor to the bipartisan Congressional Native American Caucus, then later serving nearly 4 years for President Obama as the first ever senior policy advisor to the White House Domestic Policy Council. I've gone full circle with my career, having started as an intern at Cherokee Nation for the late Wilma Mankiller, who's just over my right shoulder. She influenced my career path and my love for policy and Native American affairs. And so I love this panel. Crystal, I love all that you do with Illuminative. I'm so glad you founded this organization. I'm so particularly proud of the fact that you continue to push your organization and engaging different entities to continue to research and see what needs to happen next. I love the next level conversation that you always have. It's very thoughtful. Thank you for having me.
Thank you, Kim, and thank you, Twyla. All right, so I'm going to turn down over here and start with you, Miss Abigail.
Hello, everyone. I'm Abigail Echo Hawk, a citizen of the Pawnee Nation of Oklahoma. On my father's side, born and raised in the heart of Alaska amongst the upper Otna-Athabascan people of Mentasta Lake, Alaska. I'm a storyteller. I'm an artist. I'm a poet. I'm whatever it takes to ensure the stories of our people are told from our voices in our way for our futures. In that role, I am the Executive Vice President of the Seattle Indian Health Board, where I direct the Urban Indian Health Institute, where I get to use my data nerd skills to tell our stories in the beauty of what Indigenous data is and always should be.
Thank you. Here you come.
Good afternoon, Dagot. My name is Mary Kim Titla, a member of the San Carlos Apache tribe. I'm very honored to be a part of this panel with women that I respect, admire, and love. And thank you for inviting me. I'm the executive director for a national organization called Unity. It's an acronym, United National Indian Tribal Youth. We work with youth ages 14 to 24, and we're getting ready for a big conference this summer in Portland, and we're expecting 2,400 Native youth and adults. Interestingly, I went through the program a long time ago in the 1900s, and I went through the program, and it inspired me and empowered me, and I had no idea one day I would come full circle, and the late J.R. Cook, executive director, would ask me to take his place. And so I'm very humbled, to help empower our youth. And the whole premise for the foundation is really to provide a platform for our Native youth to express their voice, to organize, to collaborate, to network. And we're the only organization in the country since 1976 that has had a network of youth councils in 36 states, and we have more than 300 affiliated youth councils. So, yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Miss Judith.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Judith LeBlanc. I'm a citizen of the Caddo Nation. I'm a wicked urban Indian. Usually I have a moccasin on one foot and a high heel, but because it's my 72nd birthday, I'm going to just
Happy
wear sneakers.
birthday, Judith.
And I can't think of a better way to celebrate than to be with my gal pals here. I am an Ika in Caddo, that's grandma of 2 delicious grandchildren, and I'm the executive director of the Native Organizers Alliance, which is a national organizing and training network that grew out of the grassroots movement to pass the Indian Health Improvement Act, which was eventually rolled into the Affordable Care Act. So we've been to a few rodeos, and I've been the ED since the year before Standing Rock. So I've been riding that surf, and luckily, right in the beginning, Crystal and I connected, and so Illuminative and NOA are sister organizations.
We are, and we've gotten up into some good trouble. Mm-hmm. All right, Miss Jade.
Oh, always a hard act to follow, Judith. Hi, everyone. I'm Jade Begay. I am Tesuque, Pueblo, and Diné. Hi, all my Tesuques in here. I saw a few of you. I work at the intersections of indigenous rights, climate justice, and policy. I am a free agent right now, just making sure that we are advancing climate justice. We're in a big moment at this point in time. So just driving resources to our people to build climate solutions on our terms. And I also have the privilege of working in storytelling as well and doing narrative work. I'm the impact producer for a film called Sugarcane, which eventually I hope all of you will see soon.
Such an important film. Such an important film. All right, ladies, here's the thing. It's an embarrassment of riches to have 6 of you, okay? So which means we got to keep these answers popping, right? But really, like, the first thing that comes to mind, and I'm just not going to call anybody, so just get ready to jump in, but, like, you know, particularly for those of you that have been here over the last 2 days and been listening to these research, you know, presentations, listening to conversations at the table, and I know, you know, Twyla and Kim, we also sent you some of the high-level research summaries. I would just love one thing that you've heard, that you've read, that is getting you thinking, wow, this really connects with what's happening in the issue areas that I'm working in right now and as you're thinking ahead. Who wants to go first?
I love that you've talked about a lot of important things, but amplifying voices, just supporting each other, and you know, taking into consideration our youth. I would just like to say that, you know, the research is great. I love that we're doing the research in Indian country, especially as it pertains to adults, 18 and older. However, I will say that our youth desperately would love to be involved in research and surveys. They have strong opinions. They have very awesome ideas about how to propel Indian country forward. And so one of the things that I don't, you know, want to you know, sit here and say I speak for the youth, because I don't, but I did ask by text of our co-presidents for our National Unity Council, you know, what's important to them, and just promoting, you know, bringing our youth, you know, ages 14 on up to the table, and making sure that they're included, that their youth voice is, you know, represented.
I love that. Who else?
Well, I have to bring up 2. One is that
It's your birthday, so you get
it's
the
my
bonus.
birthday. The first is that the realization of how important it is to see ourselves in TVs and movies, to our children to see Deb governing for the whole, but my main regret is that I did not get the role on Res Dogs of the elder sitting on a stuffed chair, drinking a bud, smoking a cigarette. So if Illuminative could help me fulfill my dream for my descendants, please. But
Okay, all you working in media and entertainment, take that note down for Judith. She's ready to be cast still.
Somebody tell Sterling, hashtag Sterling Harjo, get Judith on Res Dogs.
my homeboy. So I think the thing that struck me about the data is that we have to be thinking between now and 2030 about increasing our visibility and our power, because 2030 is when the next census is. And elections are only a snapshot of our power. So we have to be building our power on issues because we are not a special interest group. And we have to stop acting like it. When you look at how other people see us, we are speaking on issues that are majority concerns. Majority concerns. So when we speak, like we did at Standing Rock, Dave Ashenbo was not speaking on behalf of 10,000 members. He was fighting on behalf of 17 million people living downriver on the Missouri. That's who he was representing, and that's how we should be conducting ourselves, and I think the data confirms that.
Great. Thank you for that, Judith. Kim, I saw you come off mute.
Yeah, so I think two words actually that wrap it up for me is representation matters. And what I mean by that is that your policy supports the proposition that we must continue to educate. We must continue to use vehicles like social media, that the vast majority of people who were polled believe that the United States should honor its treaty rights. That Native Americans face discrimination, right? And one of the impediments to us getting visibility and getting information out there is education, this education gap, right? Especially when you have states like Oklahoma that banned critical race theory, banned the teaching of Killers of the Flower Moon, right? The book, because somebody might feel uncomfortable. So what I mean by that, representation matters, is you've got to vote. You've got to select candidates who believe in our history and believe in advancing policies that will not harm us, that will support us, that we participate in every level of government, county, state, and federal elections as nominations as well across the board. I think we saw a rise, right, in political representation with members of Congress who are Native Americans. We see, Deb Haaland, who's the first ever cabinet official. We've had, with first ever Native American U.S. ambassador. These things didn't exist 10 years ago, not at the level they exist today. And so we also, in the past 10 years, I think, see more economic growth within Indian country too. Tribes using their resources to not only participate in the political process, but also concurrently, you see bigger voices being heard. You see the establishment of Illuminative. You see more people in the creative industry, more people in the political industry rising into a level that we've not seen before. And we're becoming accustomed to this representation. And I think that we have to have more there, because the more we have influence at every level of government, the more we have influence in the creative space and other spaces, then the more our message is going to get out there, and the more that people who are in these places of decision-making are able to help us with all the other priorities that we have, from honoring treaty rights to housing, infrastructure, food security issues. And so I think ultimately representation matters.
Thank you so much for that, Kim. Abigail?
I just can't quit thinking about how much not only visibility matters, but what it means to be controlling the stories and the narratives. So when I saw the data around the representation and the understanding of missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls and the differences between who people knew about. They knew about this beautiful young white girl who was killed in Wyoming, but they didn't know about Savannah Greywind, who there is a piece of national legislation that was named after her. And it reminded me of, it was like 6 years ago, as part of a gathering that had been put together, and I was working on what was then the very first report on missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls that used data in 2018. And it was with a gathering that Crystal and others were at. I had been invited, and I feel like I was carrying all of their stories with me into that gathering. And we were talking about visibility, and then looking back and saying, oh my gosh, we did it. You know, I was sitting in front of Congress a couple of weeks ago doing testimony in front of the appropriations, talking about the current crisis, and every member of Congress talked about, oh yes, I saw this on TV. But then they named stories that weren't about actual Native women or Native people. They couldn't tell me the story of somebody who had died, and they definitely couldn't tell me how they lived. And so we've raised the awareness. And now how do we ensure that the representation of who we are is embedded in it? And that's what I'm very excited about. And when it comes to where my heart and my work is, and that is to end this crisis of violence against our people, we have to talk just as much about how beautiful their lives were, not just about how brutally they were taken from us. And that is our responsibility to ensure that story is told. And this is our opportunity now to think about the beauty of our stories is not just in how we die or how we suffer. The beauty is in the culture's strength and the resiliency of our ancestors, that we are sitting in a room as the tangible manifestation of how they survived so we could thrive.
Thank you. Thank you, Abigail. Jade?
Sure, yes. I mean, naturally, Holly's presentation this morning really resonated with me. As a colleague who works in policy, I'm definitely the person in the room who's a nerd. As an advocate on a lot of our issues, we need more data. We just do. It's gonna improve the way we advocate. It's going to help us land wins. And so I get really excited when I see all the learnings that we've gotten over the last few days and how to translate that into how we organize better. I think one of the things that kind of just a learning and an observation is also just like the stories we tell and prioritize. As a climate person, I want to see more climate stories coming from us. We are doing so much right now. We are leading in climate, and we have been since Standing Rock. I think arguably we could, and objectively, we could say that Standing Rock really launched what is going on right now, which is the largest climate investments being implemented in the country. Also, the drive of the largest federal investments into tribes ever, into infrastructure, into climate solutions, helping us address the environmental injustices that have, been happening since we've been displaced and put into reservations. So I just want to see more storytelling, collective storytelling. I loved the session yesterday around, how can we better lift up our wins. I think in these moments where I am seeing the movement, whatever we want to call that, kind of fractured, I think I would like to see more like celebration of our wins, and climate is definitely a place where we are winning in a big way.
Love that. Twyla?
Yeah, oh my goodness, it's hard to follow all of that. But I guess I would touch on the topic of visibility, and I guess the flip side of that being that invisibility for Indigenous people can be deadly. And the ladies spoke on it at length in various spaces. And whether you're talking about youth or elders was where I kind of cut my teeth in terms of research as the director of the National Research Center on Native American Aging. As an example, the COVID pandemic, I knew researchers in my circle that could see, Indigenous researchers that could see from miles away. Once it was coming, we knew that would be devastating to Indian country because of the pre-existing conditions, because of the lack of funding, because of all the things that we had been advocating for decades prior to that even happening. We just have lower life expectancies and things of that nature. And really, it was the amplification of that data, of that information, and just knowing that we were basically standing at a precipice and getting it out to the media, that we were able to amplify the stories of these elders, amplify the stories of these communities that are already at risk, facing something down like COVID. And the way we leaned into our community care, which is a traditional value, just like some of the colleagues on the stage said, we don't necessarily want to look always from the space of deficit or from lack. Indian country, our communities have invented community care on this continent. And we are the standard, and we can continue to lean into those traditional values and implement them as tools regularly, all the time, not just during a pandemic, but in any space that you're thinking about, whether you're talking about youth suicide, or if you're talking about elder care, or if you're talking about, oh my gosh, maternal care, or anything of that nature. Visibility means life, and therefore it's important that we continue to kind of tell those stories, both the quantitative, the numbers, and the qualitative, those anecdotal stories coming from the voices of our youth, coming from the voices of our elders, coming from the ladies that are on the stage, everyone that's probably at the convening. All of those stories matter. We were the first storytellers on this continent, and we will continue to be.
Thank you for that. Visibility is life. Visibility is life. When we think about our people, all the things, and I think, you know, in reflecting, again, there's like this kind of common thread, like, and, you know, I think, you know, Abigail, Jade, you kind of both hit on it, like, we need to not just be telling the stories of the trauma, the pain, the challenges. We need to be telling stories of our beauty. And not always just like our resilience. I'm kind of like, yeah. But like what we're doing now, that the way that we're living, we're thriving, all of those things, the wins, and making sure all voices, including our young ones, right, are included. So this afternoon, you know, we're going into these strategy tables. And this is the part I, you know, was saying in the lead up to, you know, having you ladies come into this circle, was that this is the part where I'm really excited about. This is where the rubber meets the road, because otherwise all these, like, this research is just like a nice PowerPoint and it goes on somebody's shelf and we all forget about it. It's really about taking it out, and all of you in the room and the people that are on the live stream, like listening, you know, and like us thinking, like, where does what we heard and learned about in this research really start to connect with big issue areas that are a priority in Indian country, whether that's voting and political representation, whether it's climate, right? Whether it's our young people, our missing and murdered relatives, right? Like, you know, a lot of different issues that we're all contending with. Where does it, like, not only connect and inform, but like, how do we breathe life into it? Right? Where do we breathe life into this in terms of, like, as we think about collectively building strategy? How are we collectively organizing around different things together? Because the research can't do that for us. Only we as the people can do this. And so what I'd like to turn and ask every one of you ladies as we start to think about that, I mean, there's so many priorities as we think ahead, right? But I just want you to kind of like zero in on one. Maybe the birthday girl gets picked too. But, you know, like, as you're really thinking about the area in which you're organizing and advocating in, and you're looking at the election and beyond, what is something like a call to action as all these people are thinking about going into these strategy tables this afternoon that you're really, is of present mind? And Judith, I want to start with you.
Well, I think it's really critical for us to take the data and weave it with our worldview and develop spiritually directed, values-directed strategies. If we don't do that, we're not playing our role in carrying out ancestral responsibilities. And Vine Delorious said, we cannot afford to privilege Western science over traditional understandings and knowledge. We cannot afford to privilege traditional knowledge over science. We have to find a way to weave them for the good of our people in the present and for our descendants. And so I think the issue of sovereignty has to be a guiding truth for us, that in fact, majority of us are wicked urban like me and live in cities, but to give you a little sneak preview, in the Indigenous Futures Survey, which we just finished, one of the key findings for me that really filled my heart was that no matter how you cut the data, age, location, any way of cutting the data, the top issue was sovereignty. We did that. Our organizing and the work that has been done in visibility and building our power in an array of issues and our representation did that. It raised the consciousness of our people to think about sovereignty. I don't think we're going to vote our way into sovereignty. It's just not going to happen. But voting is a tool in our toolkit for us to reach that horizon goal. Voting and organizing around issues and advocacy in between elections. It is so important now, and in the work that we're doing on voter engagement across Indian country, NOA is partnering with Illuminative to work in 11 states, 6 battleground, 5 long-term power building investment, putting moccasins on the ground from their own communities, hosted by tribes and organizations, to build up the awareness of our people of what's at stake in these elections. I'm not going to say this is the most important elections of our lifetime. We say that every time. This is the most important election in a series because we are facing a mass movement of millions who have diametrically opposed values to us. One election cycle is not going to address that serious deficit of values and the attacks on sovereignty and on our rights. So this data arms us, the Indigenous Futures Survey arms us, but the data has to be woven with our values. How will we respond to hate and racism and violence? That is our question. We have to do it with our hearts and our minds and with discernment and organize our people, because United Action is the best safety net. United Action is what has always propelled us forward. As long as we keep our eye on one thing, our values, our worldview, our teachings, then we will not stray from the path that will lead us to sovereignty, which will take a majority support. We are not going to do this alone. Durable alliances and working with all those who are moving in our direction. No matter if we disagree with them on other things, we need to build their understanding of how this constitutional right as a sovereign is necessary for a multiracial democracy.
Ooh, aho! Every time I hear Judith speak, it's like just a shot of good medicine and inspiration. Twyla, I'd like to go to you and what is top of mind for you?
Oh my goodness, it's difficult to always kind of narrow down everything. I think Lieutenant Governor Flanagan said it yesterday. It's kind of we're consistently being attacked from every single direction. But of course, my worldview is always within the realm of higher education, and particularly as it relates to tribal communities within tribal colleges and universities. And Cheryl spoke a little bit about it yesterday too. My job is to basically create more of the storytellers. I think that's probably my priority, is to continue to craft those pathways for our up-and-coming researchers, for our up-and-coming legal minds, for our up-and-coming youth and leaders, our future leaders, so that they are well-grounded in not only the traditional West and academic field, and they're well prepared for what they're going to see within those realms, but that they also have that strong grounding in identity. And that's one of the wonderful things about tribal colleges and universities, is that many of us have culture at the center of our mission, and it's mentioned in our mission. So we are very unique institutions. It's great to have a job where your whole purpose is to manufacture hope. And the hope manifests in our young people, our graduates. Every time we have somebody that walks across the stage, Indian country is a little bit stronger. And so, however, brass tacks, creating those pathways, making the resources available to our students, to our young people, or to anybody really, it costs money. It costs money. And in order to do that, I'm in DC like all the time. I'm down in our state capital. I'm with my colleagues from AHEC, from the North Dakota Tribal College System. We're advocating consistently all the time on behalf of students, on behalf of our communities, and the good that we do, not just for Indian country, but also for our region, our state. We've got to remember that our people do good not just for our own people, but for everybody. And that's a mindset, and that's a traditional value. And in order to do that, I kind of have to sell our story. And the best storytellers are really my students. They're the ones that have the grounding in the background. You wouldn't believe some of the things that they survive in order to get that degree. And they're the ones that kind of provide my drive, at least, to be able to go into these arenas and arm myself with information like what Illuminative is doing. Find those numbers and that data, because there's a dearth of it. There's absolutely a dearth of it, and there's not enough people working to create those data sets, those studies and things of that nature, in order to help me do that type of work and help my colleagues as well. But there's a lot of heart behind the work that like AHEC does, that American Indian College Fund does, that NIA does, and really it's just, we kind of continue, and like Peggy said, I think we just get up and continue to do the next good thing. And for me, that's higher education, and I have great faith in everyone that's at the convening and all my colleagues. You want to see a busy Indian, you see a professional Indian. You talk to a professional Indian, we are busy. So I think that's my priority.
I love that. Thank you, Twyla. And I've heard that phrase a couple different times since yesterday that really was impactful from Lieutenant Governor Flanagan. And how do we do the next good thing? So, Mary Kim, I turn to you. What is the next good, important thing we need to be doing in the realm of all things of our beautiful Native youth?
Well, thank you for that question. And again, I'm going to just refer to our opinions and ideas that are brought forth by our National Unity Council, which is made up of representatives from youth councils across the country. And every year they're very sophisticated. They meet at their business meetings every month, and then they have a national business meeting at our national conference and at the mid-year, and they pick the top 10 issues. So I'm just going to read real quick what their top 10 issues have been for the last year. And some of these we see, they're on the top 10 list year after year, but there's been a little bit of, new things that crop up in the last few years, especially since COVID. So number 1, substance abuse. Number 2, culture and language. Number 3, and this has only been in the top 10 the last 3 years, mental health. Number 4, domestic violence. 5, education. 6, and this is really important, more tribal leadership support for our youth. 7, climate change. 8, suicide. 9, missing and murdered Indigenous relatives. And 10, and this is also a big one and made the top 10 list. Of course, we get lots of open-ended. It's not like, A, B, C, or D. We try to do open-ended questions and lump them all together. Number 10, involvement and empowerment. So, of course, we talk a lot about that while we're here, right? From the top 10 list, they then select their national initiative. And their national initiative for the last 3 years has focused on mental health. So the conference theme for this year is restoring our roots. And a lot of that plays into, of course, sovereignty, mental health, and a lot of the topics that we've been talking about here. So again, and just asking our co-presidents about what they would like to see in the future, and that is to, again, the invitation for our youth to the table to ask for their input, right? And Unity is a good place to do that. We not only have youth training, but we also have adult training. And one of the things that we cover in the adult training is how to build rapport with our youth, how to support our youth, because we have a lot of adults that come to the conferences that maybe they volunteered to be a chaperone, right? And they're not really sure how to best support the youth while they're there. So our trainers do a very good job, in my opinion, of helping support our advisors, our adults who are there. So you're invited. So if you can't make it this year to Portland, next year we'll be in San Diego. But to put a shameless plug in for that. But also the following year will be 50 years in Oklahoma City, which is where we were founded. So hopefully we can, involve more of you. I've been talking to people at the tables that I've been sitting at and trying to initiate conversation about collaboration, because they do want to collaborate. Our youth very much, want to engage with other organizations. In fact, we do have MOAs, and sometimes it's not that formal, but with all the major national organizations like NCAI, NIEA, CNA, and other groups. So we're building those relationships, and there's of course reciprocity involved. Like, if we're going to give you a place on our stage, that they'll do the same, with their events. So thank you for that question.
Yeah, definitely. Well, it's interesting, you said climate is on that top 10
Yes.
for youth, and as we've done the Indigenous Futures Survey, this is, again, the third time we've done it. We've had more than 15,000 respondents over the last 4 years. The last 2 cycles of Indigenous Futures, climate is definitely in the top 3, and for our young people in particular, it's important. So, Jade, for you working in this space, what is one big priority thing you are really thinking about?
Yeah, thanks for pointing that out. I mean, the climate threats are so real. Let's do a live poll. How many of you are feeling threatened by climate change and that your community's lifeways are threatened by climate change?
I want to see the person that's not raising their hand. Hey.
Yeah, all of us are feeling it. It's so real. It's threatening our food sovereignty. It's threatening just like our health. I mean, did you know that Native Americans are the most likely to die from heat waves or extreme heat than any other ethnic group? That's a reality, and it's hot. It's getting hotter and hotter and hotter every year since, I think, the last 5 years has just been hotter and hotter. So just as the threats and the impacts are very, very real, so are the solutions. And there are, as I keep trying to drill down here, there are so many solutions. I have a short list here. So recently, the Solar for All program out of the IRA, the Inflation Reduction Act, $284 million went to tribes across the country for building, scaling solar infrastructure. Just a few months ago, $350 million went to a few different tribes to expand energy transition, so getting off fossil fuels. That came from DOE, and shout out to Wahala Johns, who is leading that incredible work. Yes. To Holly's point earlier today, that's the impact, to have a grassroots leader in these places driving grassroots solutions. It doesn't get better than that. So yeah, the threats are real, the solutions are real. I keep talking about all this funding that's going out right now for climate solutions, a part of the Inflation Reduction Act. It's the largest climate investment in history, but at the same time, it's just the start. It's the floor, it's not the ceiling. In fact, there are lots of issues with that package, that policy package. One, we could have been stronger in our organizing to get more money. I will just name that. I've talked to a lot of different, and I'm sure many of you policy folks in the room have had the same conversations, that we needed more money coming out of that policy. And we needed less competitive grants, because that's a real challenge for our communities. And, well, there's a whole laundry list of the ways that could be better. But all to say, IRA was a start. We need another IRA. We need 3 more, 5 more, you get the point. We need many more policy packages that look like IRA, because guess what? We have a timeline with climate. It's not like it's there and somehow it's just gonna get better in a little while. We have an actual timeline. This current IRA policy does not put us on track to meet our climate targets. We're behind. So we need another one next year, or like in the coming years. And then after that, we need a bigger one. And so all to say, that doesn't happen if we don't win in November. And I'm just going to be very frank about that, because that's real. I want to keep building on the work that so many of you all, that myself, that all of us here have done. I want to keep going. I want to keep scaling. I want to keep winning. But in order to do that, we need to come together right now, mobilize, get really focused, and start planning and preparing for what happens if we win, but also what happens in the scenario where environmental policies start getting dismantled. What happens when these threats to sovereignty become more and more apparent and more real because there's an authoritarian, you know. And so that's what's top of mind for me. We gotta start leading right now and start getting mobilized to win this November.
I just want to like double tap, because I think we're always like, we got to prepare for the worst, but I love also, let's prepare for the best case scenario too. Let's just be prepared. Abigail, I'm coming to you. What's one thing, Abigail?
I can keep it to one, I promise. But I first want to say that I want to acknowledge that every single one of you have been actively engaged in an Indigenous value, and that is research and data. We always were researchers. We always gathered data from teepee liners that in the inside, the women used to record what supplies they had for a winter, to the way that our art tells a story of not only our tribal traditions, but ways of being. We gathered numbers, we gathered stories, and we used them for one reason only, and that's the reason we're here today. We love our people. We love them. And that is the difference between academic research that's done at universities versus the value systems that Judith was just talking about. We have to not only embed ourselves in them, but it's what our feet have to be rooted in. Data for Indigenous people, by Indigenous people, and today, and yesterday, and tomorrow, and forever in the future, that is the activity we're engaging in here. And so I remember back to being in the very first gathering, and I told a story of my son. At the time, I'd been traveling a lot, and I was like, I love you more than, air. I love you more than water, just like cute things with my kid. And he's trying to beat me, right? Like we're competing, who can love each other more. And he says to me, "Mom, I have loved you since I was a star in the sky." And when the Creator said, "Who wants to be Mama Ekowak's son?" I said, me. And it rocked me. I was like, we have been chosen. We have been chosen. That's my stories. We have been chosen for our futures, for our next generations. And those stars will keep choosing us. And then just a couple weeks after that gathering, there was a prominent Native organization that released a report that called urban Indians a myth. And I thought of my son, an urban Indian, who's not a myth, who is not only alive, breathing, but contributing and building forward cultural value systems and the retelling of stories that I told, my dad told, my grandfather told. And so that is the one thing I want to make sure that we're inclusive of, particularly in the work I'm doing on missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls. Savannah's Act, the first iteration, named after Savannah Greywind, would not have helped Savannah Greywind. She was not killed on reservation. And it took advocacy, the work of my team, the assistance of my sister Lael Echohawk, who works with us. We were able to put into that legislation that urban Indians are to be included, and there's supposed to be resources for law enforcement to work with our communities. And what we have seen is no action at all. Nothing. Nothing at all. And I see that not only in that work, but as we cannot exclude our relatives who are living like Judith and I, others in this room. I don't live on reservation, but urban is where I live, tribal is who I am. And I will always be a tribal person. And right now, I am seeing people die around me and law enforcement who doesn't know what to do. Recently, I was, 2 different cases, I won't go into details, but I was sitting in a courtroom where a man who did a horrific murder against a local tribal woman, for the very first time, the prosecutors in his sentencing, and I was sitting in that sentencing, they had her tribe come and testify like they would a family member. They've never done that before. That's because of the training of my team, not the Department of Justice, like Savannah Zach said. And then I got a call from some family members in Alaska who had a loved one who was murdered on the streets of Seattle, and they had no contact with the police, no investigation, and we fought for months until we were finally able to get them to investigate this murder of a homeless Native woman that they simply didn't care about because she was a nuisance. And they said, well, we didn't know, we don't fall under these things under Savannah's Act, Not Invisible Act, and my answer to them is, you're wrong. So right now we need accountability, and we've actually have worked, I actually just, again, like I mentioned, I was in Congress and was able to get Representative Simpson to say that he would hold a hearing on the non-implementation of Savannah's Act, Not Invisible Act, and have some focus on urban Indians. And we need to make sure in our conversations at these tables that we have all of the thriving and brilliancy of our communities, and that includes those of us who do not live on reservation. Treaty and trust responsibility to me did not end when I walked off my reservation. And I get to walk on and off it, and we know that all of our relatives have that opportunity. So we fight for them. We ensure their visibility. And when I think of my son and him choosing me, I think of all of the stars that chose every single one of you. What is our accountability to them? How do we elevate their brilliance? How do we practice this research as an Indigenous value system? And how are we going to build the next future for those new stars?
Everybody just take that in. Take that in for a minute. Okay, Miss Kim Teehee, what's on your mind?
Thank you. Let me go back to Judith's opening remarks about sovereignty. I think one of the areas that I think is important to touch on is honoring treaty rights with our tribal nations. We know not every tribal nation has a treaty right but those who do, those treaties that are still valid, still the supreme law of the land, those provisions that have never been abrogated by the courts or Congress are still absolutely valid. And what better way for the United States to set a tone in this country that it honors its word than to honor the treaty rights that it made with the tribal nations who ceded vast amounts of land sessions for these treaties. And how do we do those things? Well, I think one is, goes back to education. Because there's such an educational gap in this country when it comes to our community in general. We have to go back, like Cherokee Nation's delegate to Congress. I have to go back to the 19th century and before. I have to go back to the Federalist Papers and Congress's role. It just, there's such a gap that these issues, all of our issues that involve 19th century policy and history and why, Congress even has a role, you have to have those conversations before you even get to the issue at hand, always. But it's doable. It's absolutely doable. It's doable if you take the time to educate, that you're thoughtful and do your due diligence and your research, and it leads to things. Right now, for example, Cherokee Nation's delegate to Congress issue. The House Rules Committee had an oversight hearing on this very issue. It has bipartisan support. The current chairman, Tom Cole, and the ranking member, Mr. McGovern, who was the chairman last time, support this issue. It took years to get us, during COVID, to get us to that point. And it's not just our issue, right? Delegate issue. It's about a treaty right that we want to be honored. It speaks absolutely to the 19th century policies in this country, to avoiding those policies in the future. It speaks to our sovereignty, and it speaks to what we want ultimately, which is to be respected. You also want to have an opportunity to seize on moments. Right now, we have a Biden-Harris administration who has a memorandum of understanding between 17 federal agencies that have agreed to work together to honor what? Treaty rights, right? So they've had tribal consultations on doing these things. Change takes time. Things that seem difficult and parochial in nature takes time. But I guarantee you, with sustained education, sustained organization and unity among our community, and getting those champions within Congress that want to take on that role of educating in Congress, their members at a member level, in the agencies, the decision makers, you will eventually get there. And our job is to make sure we're ready when they are ready, and that they're educated whenever they need to have those conversations. But time and time again, I do think that this country has to do some kind of acknowledgement with regard to the policies of the 19th century. And a lot of our successes have to come with the acknowledgement that there was, bad chapters in this country, and that there has to be some kind of either atonement or some kind of accountability when it comes to honoring our treaties and honoring ultimately our sovereignty.
Woo. Damn. Thank you, Kim. All these women, right? And I have breaking news for our production and event team. I'm going over time to take some questions. This is such an important, rich conversation. I won't go crazy, but we are. I do want us to be able to take a few questions from the audience. Do we have microphones out and about? Yes. So pop your hands up if you have a question for this amazing panel.
Forgot to take the working. Hello? Thank you. Yeah, you totally just saw me pull my gum out of my mouth and drop it in the cup, so sorry about that. Dungok, everybody. How are you? Good day, Louise. Benawapskeg, Wapanakik. Kachiwiliwini Kachiniwes, Kachiwiliwini Nakunsis. My name is Sage Phillips. I'm a citizen of the Penobscot Nation, so Northeast Natives represent. I'm so honored to be here. I'm a Champion for Change Fellow with the Center for Native American Youth. Before I ask my question, I want to shout out Emily over here, who I was able to connect with just a couple minutes ago before this panel, who really gave me the inspiration and courage to stand up here and speak right now. So thank you so much. I don't want to speak on behalf of all of our youth, but I can speak on behalf of Young Sage, and that is thank you for being the representation that our young Indigenous women need. I'm so, so honored to be here in your presence, and just thank you. Not gonna get emotional. My question is, I do a lot of work in higher education reform, and that work is so fulfilling, but I am so burnt out and tired. And I see that from a lot of our youth. And I'm just wondering what advice you can give, because going with the theme of the panel, right, looking ahead, to me that's looking to our youth. And I'm just wondering, what advice can you give to those of us who are just a little tired so early on in our advocacy careers? What advice do you have to give? Julie, Winnie, thank you.
Ladies, advice?
So I encourage you to actively seek out individuals who support, love, stand not only with you, but in front of you, behind you, and beside you. And I look at, I can see in the crowd actually, Cheryl Crazy Bull, who one time came up and just said, I pray for you. And she handed me a little pin that she had beaded, and it was a Native woman in a red dress. And I have taken that pin with me to Congress. I have taken it with me into homes. I have spent time with youth. And the knowledge that Cheryl's prayers are with me and her strength is carried with me has meant the world to me. So thank you, Cheryl. We need to do that for each other. We need to actively be supporting and building networks of support that are only grounded in the love for our people, not competition for resources that are artificially put up to make us fight with each other. So we have to do it together, and all of this work has to be ingrained in that.
And I would add to that you can't tell if you are being your best self unless you're in a circle that is reflecting that back to you. Every day in my own life, I have to make a decision. Am I going to walk in my values of reciprocity, of being a good relative, of the striving for collective abundance? Or am I just going to be petty? And there's just a lot of stuff I would love to be petty about. You don't know the half of it. When you're an elder, you've been to a few rodeos, right? But the one thing that our teachings intertribally advocate for is that we don't simply rely on perceptions of the little stories we tell ourselves when we see someone. When you see how they're dressed or how they talk or what they say, you have to rely on taking that eagle-eye point of view. Where did they come from? Where are they going? Who are they moving with? Because all things are in relationship and in motion. Our people have survived and thrived over many, many centuries because they sought the eagle-eye point of view and looked towards that horizon. So when we get down and dirty with one another, take a deep breath. Where did they come from? Where are they going? What should I do now? What should I do now with them to move us all towards that horizon goal of sovereignty?
Jade.
Climate work is very much an uphill battle, and it's pretty much like I'm being the bearer of bad news all the time. But I'm constantly seeing like the ways that we're being impacted negatively by this force. And so I can very much relate to experiencing burnout really early on. Also, to the person's point yesterday around how people doing storytelling work, people doing social media tend to be younger people. We're exposed to all of the things that are happening on social media and in the internet, and it can be really daunting and hard emotionally, mentally. One thing a mentor told me early on, also that's like a key thing, is get mentors. They're really helpful. They tell you to slow down, they tell you to stop, they humble you. But she shared with me, she said this sentiment, which I'm not gonna say as eloquently, but the point of it is essentially, you aren't too important that we need you all the time, but you are too important to not rest and to not be well. And I took that as like, okay, like let go of ego. I don't need to be controlling and involved and engaged all the time. Like the things aren't gonna fall apart if I leave. But if I don't leave to rest, to take time to heal, restore, whatever, I could be lost. I could get unhealthy. All the things that can happen from burnout could lead me to like not be present in the work I do at all. So that was one that really stuck with me and really made me prioritize boundaries and rest and like all these things that are so important to implement in your work and your life.
And I would just say, like, to insert myself in the conversation, because it's something I'm thinking a lot about right now. I think recently our staff got to be in conversation with my uncle John Echohawk, who's the executive director of the Native American Rights Fund, and somebody was like, how do you avoid burnout? And my family, we were watching, we were like, oh God, this is not a question for my family, right, Abigail? But the one thing he was saying, well, this is just a way of life. This is just a way of life. But I think if we pull back for a minute, and even if you don't work for an activist, grassroots organization, it's a way of life. Even if you're like showing up and working at the bank or whatever, right? And it's just part of those, like, I think original instructions, like, and we talk about the stars, it's already inside of us, right? And to think about every day in whatever small and big ways, what is the next good thing that you can do for yourself, for your family, for your community, so on, your nation, like all the things. But I think what these amazing women are all saying, and what I think I'm very much in a journey myself, I'm turning 53 this year. And like a baby. As some of the audience are like, she's an old hag. But I think I came up in a generation, and I think a lot of us know, right, of, man, you just did this 24/7. That's it. and our kids never saw us. We didn't see our parents. Like, you're sleeping on the floor at some meeting, but you just live it and you breathe it. But that's not sustainable. And so it's like in those moments of like coming to this where you're like, I'm not showing up as my best self. Most importantly for myself or my daughter. And so I think it's those moments now, if I like look back and I'm trying to figure out how not to be a total maniac, and all my staff, the Illuminate staff are like, please soon. But to where do you find that balance? Because actually the work that we can do can be so much more effective, to Jade's point, if we're rested. And like Charisse was saying yesterday, like to be just sometimes reminded to eat, to drink water, to sleep, to go do some exercise. But it's all a way around, and I think that like that part of that is understanding it's always inside of us. However, that's going to manifest. But we all have to be giving something. We all have to kind of get reconnected, and whether it's showing up to vote or whatever in the community, right? We've got to make that connection with our people, because nobody else is going to do it for us but us, right? But we've got to take care of ourselves. And I think that if I could tell my younger self that, because I suddenly realized, like, if I keep going at this rate, like maybe I'll accomplish, together with all these amazing people, we'll get a lot done. But I'm going to sacrifice my health and my life on the activism. That's not what we're asking for. So let's figure out how to work smarter and harder. But I think the value is breathing in, and I'm so grateful. And like we're hearing it from our youth, mental health is really important. So family, connection, being in this room together, that's part of the medicine that's going to make the change, is just being in connection. So sorry, it's just like such a question, and I want to say thank you for asking, and we all need each other. Yeah? So on that note, I'm actually just going to hog up the rest of the airtime because I keep getting like blinking lights at me. So I cannot, these women, all of these women that are on the stage, on the screen, I'm fangirling. And like the work all of you do, and I'm not gonna look at any of you, and some of you I've known a long time. Like, you fortify me, you inspire me, you make me laugh. Twyla, I have been the biggest fangirl forever. Twyla makes me laugh all the time on social media. Me too. Right? But these women just represent like millions of amazing, not only Native women, but just our people. Right? And like, let's just like go do this, okay? So give a warm round, like raucous applause for these just incredible matriarchs. Let's stand, let's honor these matriarchs, these women. And Kim and Twyla, you're here with us, sisters in spirit. We love you, and thank you so much for zooming in. And I just want to shout out to Kim Teehee and the Cherokee Nation. Claremore was recently hit by a tornado, and Kim, I know that's why you couldn't be here today. And so we just want to thank you for everything you do for your people, in good times and bad.